All right, YouTube, it's time to talk about what the Senate has done regarding ISPs. Now, first, so that people will stop fear-mongering about this. ISPs are already allowed to sell your user data to people. What the Senate just killed was a suggestion for a bill that would stop them from ever being able to do this. For years and years now, these internet service providers have technically been able to take your user data, store it, and sell it to the highest bidder. As far as I know, few of them have even begun to think about implementing such a plan, probably because people would get really, really mad if they thought their user data was being sold. Now, this suggestion simply means that something that they apparently haven't bothered to start doing anyway would require the consent of the users in order to actually sell that data off. In that sense, because the ISPs don't apparently engage in that behavior, I'm not exactly sure what the threat to privacy is, as an absolute, because it hasn't actually been occurring. Because the free market of people able to potentially switch services if an ISP starts engaging in such behavior means they probably worry that if they were to get the money from selling the user data, they would lose more money because people would abandon their actual service. That being said, though, I still believe it's a good idea to implement such a rule to protect the Fourth Amendment and First Amendment explicitly. This could be used for nefarious purposes by political groups, to gain information about people they don't like, to harass them or whatever. That's one possibility. It could be used for targeted ads that people, on any other platform have already opted out of if they're capable of doing so, because people don't want that sort of crap. It could also compromise people's data. If you begin selling user data off to these other companies and it's being stored elsewhere, there's an increasing likelihood that that user data somehow gets hacked into and used again for political motives, for fiscal motives, blackmail or whatever. It seems like a pretty bad idea for this information to be spread around. In fact, the ISPs themselves probably shouldn't store it for too long a period of time, specifically for those security concerns. The biggest security concerns we're getting, because of all this additional access to user data, in whatever form it happens to take, by bureaucratic entities at the government level, by private companies, by ISPs, because that data is proliferating, it's seen now as a commercial sort of tangible asset that can be sold off and traded. There's an increased likelihood that anytime someone hacks into something successfully, they gain access to that kind of data. That's the real problem. We find, of course, like the CIA's program. It's been leaked, so it's probably already being used by foreign governments to spy on U.S. citizens. Thank you very much, by the way. So it is a good idea to limit their ability to get this data and then sell it to people. I think that's a good idea. Does it violate the Fourth Amendment? The ISPs are not government agencies. Technically speaking, it doesn't violate the Fourth Amendment. But because government or political groups may gain access to that data, including using taxpayers' money to do so, technically, yeah, it still violates the Fourth Amendment, even though it's a private entity that's gaining the data and profiting off it in the first place, because anybody else particularly could gain access to it. You might think, for an example, let's say some senator locked in a battle with someone who wants to replace them decides to buy the user data of that other political candidate in order to comb through it and find scandalous material. Well, that kind of, I think it would become a problem. Or let's say that a private entity, private company, I've got a regional soda selling firm. I want to get dirt on the people that work for this other regional soda selling firm. I think I'll just buy their user data. I'll buy the data from their home connections. I'll try to figure out how to do that, and then I'll get the data on their CEO and all this, and then I'll ruin their reputation or something like that. It would be ripe for legal battles. Ultimately, I think the Supreme Court will end up weighing in on this if it goes through, if ISPs ever do begin doing so. And they will, in my opinion, in my estimation, they would rule on the side of personal liberty. In my estimation, even under its current constituency, even under its current form in the Supreme Court, I think they would side with users and say, yeah, you need to get their consent to sell this data, specifically because it could be potentially misused for political motives. Well, there's one strike. Potentially used in a strictly political sense by government agencies. That's strike number 2. and I think that it would get taken out, essentially. And you might draw a comparison here regarding why people would be upset about the idea of the ISPs doing this. What would happen if, like, FedEx or UPS, some firm that competes with the U.S. Postal Service? Postal Service is already, your stuff there is basically already constitutionally protected because it's a bureaucratic entity, more or less. There's some restrictions on that for pragmatic purposes, like, oh, this package is ticking, I think we need to open it up and look inside just to make sure, because otherwise it could, violate other people's rights to send their own mail or kill somebody, and it could be an explosive or something. That's one thing. What if these private entities that also engage in that activity, sending people's packages and letters around, what if they were to say, oh, we're going to begin selling lists of where you're getting mail from and sending it to, and the names of these people and their addresses and stuff? What if they were to do that? Do you think there'd be public outcry? I think that there would be. And it's the same general principle. The fact that the communication online that happens is less tangible, because it's essentially just data shooting across some wires or wireless connections or something from one server to another, from one computer to another, doesn't mean that it is any less communicative in the sense applied to by the First and Fourth Amendments. It's the same thing. It's the same as sending or receiving a letter or a package or something like that. And it's intertwined with the mail anyway. Look at eBay, look at Amazon, something like that, or Etsy. Yeah, it should be constitutionally explicitly protected forms of speech. Privacy should apply. ISPs should not be selling this material. But the golden lining, again, or silver lining maybe, is that they apparently haven't been doing so anyway, despite technically being allowed to do so. I think probably they were waiting to see what the Senate would do, but it was a fairly close vote there. The Republicans apparently are for allowing ISPs to sell this data. But it is ultimately slightly like net neutrality. Net neutrality has been essentially rescinded, and there hasn't been that great deal of a change online since that happened. And it came attendant with its own problems because of the government level of control that was involved. The idea of net neutrality, in the sense of people shouldn't be throttling connections to this site or that site for ad purposes or whatever, is a fundamentally good concept, but it doesn't necessarily require government involvement. In fact, all it would really require is a statement by the judicial system that it would be illegal to do so. It doesn't require an elaborate bureaucratic plan to be overseen by the FCC, any more, by the way, than this ISP crap does. It doesn't require this bureaucratic entity to administer an actual program to prevent it from happening. That costs money, and it potentially comes attendant with government censorship or government over-regulation or something like that could really drive costs up for ISPs and thus for the consumers. What it requires is the judiciary to weigh in and say basically the same thing. It's much more simple. Take it to court. Let the judiciary handle it. I would be fairly confident that they would come down on the side of personal privacy and free speech on this issue. That would be my consideration. Otherwise, let the protection go through and see what happens. The Senate should not have attempted to do this. The House now weighs in. Hopefully they will be stopped from actually allowing ISPs to do this. Let the rule kick in. If people cry foul and there's an actual problem as the result of it, then you can rescind it. Then you can send it to the judiciary. That's about all. Peace out.